Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with The Sun's chief political correspondent, Jack Elsom, and the journalist and broadcaster, Jenny Kleeman. Welcome both. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. Unfortunately, it's unsurprising which story is leading. The multiple stabbing in Southport, which has left 2 children dead and 6 more critically ill. That's the top story in the Eye. The Guardian says that in total, 9 other people were injured in the attack, apart from those who died. Knifeman kills 2 children in holiday club horror. That's the headline in The Telegraph. Eyewitnesses tell The Times the attack was like something out of a horror movie. The Express too goes with that horror movie line. This, meanwhile, is the front of The Sun. 2 children killed at holiday club. Likewise, the Mail, with a very similar headline, the Daily Star, meanwhile, describes it as carnage at the kids' club. As for the other stories, the Financial Times leads with Chancellor Rachel Reeves' allegation that the previous government left a £22 billion black hole in the public finances, as well as the measures that she announced in response. The Metro reports that the former BBC News reader Hugh Edwards has been charged with 3 counts of making indecent images of children. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code that you'll see on screen during the program, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Jack Elsom and Jenny Kleeman. Thank you both so much for being with us. Well, that horrific story out of Southport, obviously making most of the front pages. Let's just look at the front page of the Eye. Deadly knife attack at children's dance class. Let's just also pull up the front page of the Times. And this line about being like a horror movie, which we also heard from so many people that, eyewitnesses that discussed the aftermath of what they saw. Jenny, it's hard to know sort of what to say. It really is absolutely shocking.
I mean, I dropped my children off at a holiday camp, my primary school age children this morning. There will be so many people watching this who did the same or dropped their grandchildren off. This is the beginning of the summer holidays. A joyful thing, a Taylor Swift dance class. This happened just before the end of it. And, the gun laws in this country mean that we don't have mass shootings, and mass violence is rare. And mass stabbings of children are basically unheard of. But this is really unthinkable. The horror of this and the deliberateness that must have been behind it in order to get the number of injured, somebody systematically going through a room full of young children at a dance class. It is truly appalling. It is unthinkable, really. And we have, details are still emerging about all of this. We know that the police say that this was, as far as they know, not terror-related, but it is terrifying, and not just for the people of Southport, but for everybody. The idea that this can happen, in our society today, and that, this 17-year-old boy who's been arrested, that somebody so young can so deliberately want this to happen, because it takes a lot of doing, stabbing this many people.
Well, the word that the police used was ferocious. And if you think, 9 people, and 9 people with serious injuries, including the 2 adults who were trying to protect the children.
And that's the point that the police chief constable made in her press conference earlier, that among these kids, which is obviously completely horrifying and harrowing, there were 2 adults who bravely tried to fight off this attacker. In the sort of the bravery and courage you have to do to protect a room full of kids is completely commendable. But this story has obviously been splashed across almost every front page tomorrow, and that is because it is just completely harrowing, haunting. It's utterly horrific. Any death is a tragedy. And, as Brits, we have had our fair share of tragedies in recent years, although I think that the killing of children just elicits something almost repulsive, doesn't it, in the collective consciousness, because not only do they have their entire lives ahead of them, but they're just so vulnerable. And you add in the whole element of it's a Taylor Swift themed event, it's the start of the summer holidays, everyone's meant to be having fun. It's just awful and shocking. And I think that there's going to be a collective raw feeling of anger and fear in that community now. And I think that actually the police chief did do a very commendable job earlier in trying to set out all the facts and trying to reassure the community that they're going to be more police in the streets coming in the next few days. But it's just a shocking tale.
I mean, a huge shock for the community, obviously, but a shock for the country. And you can tell by the reactions that we've had from the King and Queen, Prince and Princess of Wales, the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Yes, absolutely senseless and shocking. And I think over the course of today, there was this major incident and we knew that something terrible had happened, but it was at around 6 o'clock when we found out that two children had lost their lives and so many others critically injured, which means, they are in a very, very serious condition in hospital, that I think we all began to realise that an enormous tragedy had happened. And that's what's behind all these statements, just something so brutal, so horrifying, and of course, so entirely unprovoked and perverse. This is going to be on the front of the papers for days to come as we find out the names of the victims, we find out about their families, and also we find out more about the person responsible for this.
Let's take a look at another story that normally would have been, of course, our lead story, and that is that announcement by Rachel Reeves. Let's look at the front page of the FT. Reeves unveils incredibly tough choices to plug £22 billion fiscal hole. This is the one that she said she basically hadn't really realised would be there, left by the previous government. A lot of anger in the comments today, didn't you think, Jack?
Oh, yeah, it was a very politically charged debate in the Commons earlier, and there was many concrete announcements, big public sector pay rises and big squeeze on things like winter fuel payments. But this was a massive piece of political theatre in which Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is trying to, as loudly and vividly as possible, blame a dire inheritance and a awful £22 billion black hole in the nation's finances on the Tory government. And that is going to essentially justify big tax rises, we assume, later in the autumn. And that budget she announced today on October 30th, she pretty much dropped a all but conclusive hint that taxes would go up. She says that that budget will involve difficult decisions on welfare, on spending and on tax. She's ruled out certain tax hikes, VAT, income tax, national insurance, but there are other mechanisms and levers that she can pull. And so today was basically rolling the pitch for that down the line.
Jenny, before I come to you, let's just look at The Guardian front page. Obviously, they have a big picture of the horrific events in Southport, but The Guardian also has this: Reeves acts to plug £22 billion hole covered up by Tories. There is some contention around some of the measures that she's decided to go for.
Yes, and it's interesting. The Guardian has pointed out essentially that this is a political choice. It says almost half of the shortfall, £9.4 billion, was a result of her decision to fund above inflation pay sector pay recommendations in full. The fact is, after winning this thumping majority, the Labour Party is never going to be more powerful than it is now, the government. And particularly at the beginning of its administration, this is the time for her to do unpopular things. And, of course, the Tories are going to say that this was a cunning plan, that they had planned all along to raise taxes and they were just looking for an excuse. But you do have the OBR sort of agreeing that the information that they were given when they were planning fiscal forecasts was not in full, was not transparent. You have the IFS saying that there were a huge number of unfunded plans. This idea of this £20 billion national insurance cut being incredibly irresponsible given the state of the public finances. So it does appear that there is some credibility to what she's saying, but make no mistake, this is politics. This is a political choice. It
seemed that Jeremy Hunt was even a bit caught off guard by that.
Yes, he looked very wrong-footed.
And I think that a lot of people thought that this would be the classic Rachel Reeves Labour tactic of saying, oh, things are much more worse than expected, and she'd do a whole shocks routine. And the IFS and the Tories were ready to come out and jump down her throats and say the books were open. It does genuinely seem that there has been a lot of overspending, especially on things like asylum costs, rail projects, even Ukraine funding was being dipped into from the reserve pot. And so, there's a big pool of money which is missing at the moment, and tough choices, as Jenny said, you have to do it at the start. That's when you can blame the last lot. You can't do it 5 years' time.
Let's look at this double-page spread in The Sun, and actually you've got one of the bylines here, Jack. So pages 10 and 11 of The Sun. There we go. Winter is coming. Always good to have a Game of Thrones little reference there. But you mentioned there, I mean, the reserve funds was something that the IFS also mentioned, that it seemed to have been used more than once. Yeah, exactly. And this is going to justify very difficult decisions, in the words of Rachel Reeves. Winter is coming, obviously, a pun about the winter fuel payments. You know, incredibly contentious policy, which Rachel Reeves announced today, is that the winter fuel payments, essentially almost like a £300 bung to currently about 12 million people on the state pension, will be massively reduced by about 10 million. It will be means tested, so only the poorest people will get this. Rachel Reeves saying that, you know, not everybody should be able to get this payment. There are a lot of affluent pensioners who currently get it. Campaigners Age UK have come out today pretty hard and said, well, actually, it's not just going to be the pensioners on the breadline who still get this. There's going to be a lot of people affected, and they're really going to struggle because I think the cut-off is about £12,000. So it's going to be a lot of struggle for people who have this taken away from them. And Martin Lewis, the money-saving expert, has also come out against the measure. What do you make of it, Jenny?
Well, I mean, she's been quite clever in how she presents it. She's using that whole household budgets metaphor that, you know, we're not going to spend money that we can't afford. But we know that there are a lot of things that have been scrapped. For example, the Stonehenge bypass bits to do, you know, to do with Rwanda, or you
stations
know,
and trains.
Things that were going to get thrown out anyway. There's 40 new hospitals that never really got off the ground. So, you know, as I said, it is all political. It is all a choice. And the decision to fund, for example, to offer 22% to the junior doctors, you know, it is a coup that within a couple of weeks of being in government, that after, you know, 16 months of striking, 11 strikes, that they can present the BMA with a pay offer that the BMA is going to recommend to its members and say they're drawing a line under it. They're going to see that as a success, but it's an expensive success.
Let's take a quick look at a story that I think has been completely overshadowed, unsurprisingly, today, and that was actually that it was the deadline for anyone entering the Tory leadership race, and now we have the full lineup. Let's look at the Sun, page 2. And we can see the full lineup that maybe we could have predicted a while ago, apart from Suella Braverman, who decided not to go.
Yeah, I think these are probably the obvious 6 to make it through. It'll get whittled down to 4 just after Conservative Party conference in the autumn, and then a final 2 will go forward to a ballot of the members to be announced on November 2nd. Usually how these races work is that you have 2 emerging candidates whittled down by MPs, and you usually have 1 candidate from the sort of centre of the party and then 1 candidate from the right. I think at the moment, Kemi Badenoch, the Shadow Housing Secretary, is probably the favourite to be the standard bearer of the right, although Robert Jenrick's also making a bit of a claim for that. And then you'd have to sort of look at people like Tom Tugendhat and James Cleverly as the people that go forward on the left. I think Tugendhat probably has the edge at the moment, a bit more support, but it's going to be a pretty hard-fought contest in the next few months.
And Jenny, the Daily Telegraph have an explanation as to why maybe Braverman didn't throw her hat in the ring.
Well, yes. I mean, there's always been this sort of flirtation between Braverman and Reform. I'm sure they would be happy to have her. But I think the consensus is that she misread the mood of the Tory party. Immediately after the Tories' defeat, she said some quite bonkers things in America that went down like a cup of cold sick. And I think also she perhaps wants to be leader when there is a chance of being Prime Minister. And there isn't for a while now. I mean, I was thinking about this nostalgically, the days when a Tory leadership contest was who's going to be Prime Minister. It was all very consequential, but not so much anymore.
I'm happy to eat my words, but I don't think Suella Braverman's going to be Prime Minister anytime.
No. We'll hold you to that. One final story, page 3 of the Metro. Good news, I guess. Summer returns. What do you mean returns? When was it here? But anyway, returns. UK set to bask in heat wave until thunderstorms strike before the weekend.
Yes, well, I'm going away on holiday, so I'm quite happy to be here for the period before the thunderstorms. But there's a nice heat wave, 28 degrees. Well, there's sort of 31 is the highest. That's a decent heat wave. It's not a frightening.
31. That's very hot.
But it's not as frightening as the heat waves we had a couple of years ago, where we were all worried about the end of the world. That is a pleasant summer rather than you know, unpleasantly hot. Yeah,
you can bet your life on the fact that people are going to moan when it's sunny, and then when the thunderstorms come after the sun, people are going to moan during that as well, because it's what we Brits love to do.
Come rain or shine.
Exactly.
Jack Elsom, Jenny Kleeman, thank you so much. Stay with us. We'll talk more at the top of the hour. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, we will be live in Southport, where 2 children have died and 9 others have been injured in a stabbing attack on a children's centre.